Michelle and Whispen. As Michelle Lindsay walked down the dusty main street of Whispen, her long, unkempt hair whipping around her face, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It wasn't the usual small-town eeriness that often permeated the air. Rather, it was something more ominous, almost palpable. She glanced around, her hazel eyes darting from one building to the next, searching for any sign of what might be causing her disquiet. But the storefronts stood stoically in their ageless splendor, seemingly untouched by whatever was ailing her. She was here to buy a new computer, of course. Hers had fried itself the previous night, a victim of some freak power surge or whatever, and now she was left with nothing but her trusty old typewriter to work on her latest freelance fantasy novel. She had been planning to get one of those new Apple iStations, but now, as she continued down the street, she found herself questioning her decision. Something felt off. As she neared the computer store, she noticed that there were fewer people about than usual. The ones she did see, however, seemed to be moving with a strange sort of purpose, their eyes darting this way and that, their expressions wary and tense. Michelle hesitated for a moment, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had written a story once, you see, a story with 5 strange rules. Rules that seemed to be coming to life all around her now. She tried to push the thought aside, telling herself it was just her imagination, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The closer she got to the computer store, the more the rules seemed to press in on her, whispering their demands in her ear. She quickened her pace, suddenly eager to get the new computer and get out of this town, even if just for a little while. The rules came to her one by one as she steadily walked towards the computer store. Rule number 1. Greet without eye contact. Looking in their eyes will cause them to turn into your greatest fear. Rule number 2. Pay $1 to any individual at the entrance/exit, or you will not reach your destination. Rule number 3. Keep smiling while whispering through your teeth, so that the whisperer does not take your tongue. Can't talk without it. Rule number 4. Give a high five to any person wearing white. It shows appreciation to the ones keeping you safe. If you see their close change to black, run to the nearest shop. Rule number 5. Look down to the ground while passing or talking anyone wearing black. If you look at them, it might be your funeral next. The computer store came into view, its familiar logo hanging crookedly above the doorway. She drew a deep breath and steeled herself, reminding herself of the rules. Rule number 1. Greet without eye contact. She swallowed hard and approached the entrance, muttering a hello under her breath. The door opened, and a middle-aged man with a kindly face smiled at her. She forced herself not to look up, focusing instead on his chest as she handed over the dollar he demanded. As she stepped inside, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The rules were still there, of course, but they seemed to be less intrusive here, in the sanctum of the computer store. She hurried over to the display of iStations, her gaze taking in their sleek design and powerful specifications. This was the one, she decided. She had to have it, but as she reached out to touch the display case, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Rule number 5. Look down to the ground while passing or talking anyone wearing black. She glanced around, taking in the employees in their standard-issue black t-shirts. There was no time to waste. She picked out the saleswoman with the darkest hair and made her way over, doing her best to keep her head down and her eyes averted. As she approached, she cleared her throat, whispering through her teeth, "Excuse me, I'd like to buy that one." The saleswoman looked up at her, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, Michelle thought she might be in trouble, but then the woman smiled and nodded. "Of course, ma'am. That'll be... Let me just check the price." Michelle bit her lip, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down her back. She forced herself to stay calm, keeping her gaze fixed on the ground. The saleswoman finished up her transaction and handed her a receipt. Michelle took it with trembling hands and hurried out of the store, relief washing over her as she found herself back on Main Street. But as she made her way back home, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The rules were still there, waiting for her to slip up. And the longer she stayed in Whispen, the more she feared that her time was running out. She quickened her pace, trying not to think about the rules or the consequences of breaking them. But try as she might, She couldn't help but notice the people around her, their every movement and gesture governed by the same strange rules that had taken over her life. As she turned down her familiar street, she breathed a sigh of relief. She was almost home, almost safe. She glanced at her watch, feeling a pang of guilt for having spent so much time away from her family. But she consoled herself with the thought that she was bringing them a better life, a life free from the shackles of the rules. Her hand trembled as she fumbled with her keys, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was watching. She slipped the key into the lock and pushed the door open, stepping inside and letting out a shaky breath. It was then that she realized something was different. There was an unsettling quietness in the air, a stillness that seemed to press against her skin like a heavy blanket. Her heart began to race as she wondered if the rules had followed her home, if they were now a part of her life even when she was away from Whispen. She glanced around, unable to shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to move forward, climbing the stairs to her bedroom. As she closed the door behind her, she collapsed onto her bed, her heart racing and her thoughts spinning out of control. She couldn't shake the feeling that the rules were still there, watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. And in this moment, she knew that the only way to escape their grasp was to leave Whispen forever.